He's the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party and a good friend of the pod. Ben Wikler, welcome back to Pod Save America.
It's great to be with you, John. Always a pleasure.
So I haven't really had a chance to catch up with you since the election. So the polls in Wisconsin were wildly off again. But I remember that every time I talked to you during the campaign, you would tell me it feels really, really close here. What were you picking up that the polls didn't? And do you see Wisconsin remaining basically a 50-50 state for the foreseeable future?
I see Wisconsin as a state that is democracy enchained. It's a state that would be a bluish shade of purple if we didn't have these like hideous voter suppression laws in place that make it harder to register voters, and make it harder for people to get ballots, make it harder to cast your vote. When we win a Democratic trifecta and change the laws and make this a pro-voter state, I think that we could become more like a Colorado, where you don't have to freak out about it every election night. But for the foreseeable future, or for the moment, we've now had 4 presidential elections out of the last 6 come down to less than 1 percentage point. We've had, the blue wave of 2018, we swept every statewide office, but we won by like 1.1 percentage points in the governor's race for Governor Evers. In 2019, we had a state Supreme Court race that came down to less than 6,000 votes. So it's on a knife's edge. And you could see across Wisconsin, Trump came here 10 times in 2020. He came over and over. He held mega rallies despite the COVID pandemic, dominated every local newscast, which is still the main way most people get their news here. And you could just see that there was a ton of energy on the other side. And what we saw on Election Day was that the Trump vote jumped 15% from 2016 to 2020. After everything that happened in the midst of this deadly pandemic, with Wisconsin having one of the worst outbreaks in the country, he got 15% more votes than he did the previous time. And we won because with folks, we had 30,000 volunteers who were throwing their backs into it in Wisconsin, and with help from across the country. This massive effort drove up the number of votes for Biden relative to Clinton in every single county in the state, and we jumped 18%, and that is how we won, by a hair's breadth. But it took everyone and everything to be able to do it.
2 questions on that. One, do you think the energy on the other side, how much do you think it was connected to Trump himself? Or do you think that like in 2021, 2022 and beyond, it's still going to be there?
They're sort of separate questions. So to how much it was connected to Trump himself, it was deeply connected to Trump. There was a poll we were involved with after the election that found that like 90% of the voters for Trump said that they were voting for Trump, not against Biden. This was a referendum on Trump for them. For voters on our side, half said they were voting for Biden, half said they were voting against Trump. This was like Trump effect in full effect. And
yeah,
see it at the ward level. You can talk to voters and see it. But we just don't know like how many of the anti-Trump voters are going to come back when Trump's not there, and how many of the pro-Trump voters are going to come back when Trump's not there. Yeah. The history is 12 out of the last 14 midterms under a new president, the president's party's lost ground. So we have to defy political gravity to make gains in 22. I think we can do that. I think Biden and Harris and the Democratic Senate and House are delivering the kinds of changes in people's lives that you can actually run and win on in a midterm election, even when conditions are normally so unfavorable. But it's going to take once again all of us doing everything we can do to not have this go down the way things usually do in history, and instead actually make gains.
You made the point that on our side, organizing everyone, everywhere is how we ended up winning. Obviously, it was 20,000 votes was the margin. Are there specific places and regions and groups of voters that you think put Democrats over the top that you're looking at for future elections?
It's interesting. The answer is yes, but the answer is each of the groups of voters who had different kinds of challenges. So Republicans target voter suppression in Wisconsin and everywhere, specifically against Black and brown voters and young voters. Those are voters that they think will vote for Democrats who they don't want to have the franchise. So in Wisconsin, if you look at the places where the most Black people live in our state, it was a huge fight. Like early voting was cut. Access to get IDs that you need for voting ID laws was made harder by the COVID pandemic. Transportation was harder for folks. Like there were all these barriers in people's way, and they fought and they held steady and went up, notched up in terms of turnout in the face of these intense barriers. the voters Republicans tried to make our voting system perfectly suited to were a lot of the suburban like areas that in Wisconsin are traditionally very red outside of Milwaukee. Those swung enormously, and the barriers in front of those voters were much lower. So there was a tremendous swing in public opinion polling, and also it was easier for folks to turn that swing into votes. That's where the biggest margin changes were. Madison and the area surrounding it had this, and where I am joining you from right now and where I grew up, had this enormous wave of turnout, like mind-blowing numbers of voters and margin, but also in rural areas across the state. Like I was talking to the chair of Vilas County, one of the reddest parts of Wisconsin, and we had an improvement of 3 percentage points in the margin for, towards Biden, much larger than the swing in the state overall in Vilas County. And so like, I think it's easy to look at the map and say, oh, look at all these red rural areas. But actually, we got more votes in every single county. And we increased our vote share in 65 out of 72 counties. And if it hadn't been for the organizing in some of the reddest places, the fact that there were like state ledge candidates fighting in totally gerrymandered districts to turn out extra voters, we would have lost the 20,000 votes we needed to flip the state. So as we look forward now, we're doing a kind of all of the above strategy again. And we're building a coalitions team to keep up the kind of outreach and partnership building work in the Black community, the Latino community, with Asian American Pacific Islanders in Wisconsin. There's a significant Hmong population. We also just launched a rural advisory council that's working with a bunch of rural leaders across the state. We're building our partnerships and relationships with tribal governments. The highest jump in turnout in Wisconsin came from Menominee County, which is also the location of the Menominee Nation Reservation. They had an explosive jump, and they had also the highest margin for Biden. It was 84% Biden in Menominee County.
Wow.
So,
what do you think the overall balance was between, performance due to bringing out new voters and turnout and sort of converting voters who backed Trump in 16? Because you talked to a lot of Democratic strategists nationally and data nerds, and they say, Wisconsin's one of these states that's more of a persuasion state. Like both sides have really sort of registered all the voters they're going to register mostly, and it's all about sort of changing minds there. But it seems like clearly in some of these counties, you guys just smash turnout records.
Yeah, I think it's clearly both in Wisconsin. There's the idea of the mythical swing voter. There are swing voters in Wisconsin. There are ticket splitters in Wisconsin who were, vote simultaneously. Like Ron Kind was elected to Congress in a district that went for Trump, and that wouldn't be possible if there weren't a bunch of people who were voting for a Democrat for Congress and Trump for president. And the reverse is even more true. So you really do have to do both. And I think my ideal messages are ones that actually are both mobilizing messages and persuasion messages. And I think the stimulus bill is a great example of that really does energize our base. And it's something that's a concrete reason for people to vote for Democrats. If you look at Ron Johnson, he voted against the American Rescue Plan. He voted against your stimulus check. He voted against your child tax credit. And getting rid of him is something that motivates just about everybody. So I look for things that have both of those qualities, but I think you just can't win here with a pure mobilization play, and you can't win with a pure persuasion play. And the other side knows that too and acts on that also. Like it's so incredibly closely divided, more than any other state in the country. The closest is 3 states have had 2 elections out of the last 6 come down to 1 percentage point or less, and we're at 4. Like, because of that, you just have to play with every tool at your disposal.
Speaking of America's dumbest senator, 2 questions on Ron Johnson. One, what do you think the chances are that he actually runs again?
So if I'm Ron Johnson, which to be clear, I am not.
You are not Ron Johnson.
So deeply not Ron Johnson. But if I were Ron Johnson, I imagine what I'd be thinking is, I got elected. I'm going to switch to the third person tense, actually. He got elected on the Tea Party wave in 2010, when there was this like backlash, resurgent right attack on Obama, and he coasted. He rode that to victory. In 2016, he got elected on the Trump wave turning out. And like both times, everyone counted him out. They said he couldn't win. And then there was this kind of right-wing insurgency that he was able to grab onto and ride to victory. I think he's looking for that in 2022, and he plans to ride that to victory again. And he is like waving both hands and saying, Mercer family, Steve Bannon, OAN, like One American News Network, whatever. I'm your dude. And his hope is that then when this, red wave crashes over our state, he's going to be the guy waving from the surfboard on top of it. And that's his big strategy. And so he doesn't want to decide until he knows whether that wave is happening or not. Now, I also think he's not very good at reading the room. So he might believe that it's there because everyone he talks to tells him that it is, whether or not it is. But I think I would guess that he's not going to decide until sometime in 2022. And I would guess right now that he will conclude that he's had thousands of people telling him that they're too afraid to say it publicly, but they totally support him and he needs to fight for them and make sure that they're heard in the Senate. And so he's going to go for it. Especially given that he promised not to run for a third term when he ran for a second term. And now he's saying things have changed. I never thought total Democrat control of the government would be at stake. So, he is the white knight, if you will, for this, right-wing movement that he thinks that he's the guy for.
So I know you guys are already, fundraising against him, organizing against him. I see you've got billboards up, which I love. I'm interested in the messaging. The billboards sort of focus on him voting against the stimulus checks. You talked just about him voting against the stimulus checks. I'm interested in your decision to go with that message over the, Ron Johnson is a crazy ass conspiracy theorist message. Can you talk a little bit about that choice?
Well, I will say that after the insurrection, and when he was, full of apologies for it, after he fomented it and held a hearing, conspiracy mongering, we ran the first TV ad of the 2022 election cycle in the country, statewide on local TV channels across the state of Wisconsin, hammering him for his role in the insurrection. And that was a moment when people were calling us and saying they were lifelong Republicans who wanted to join the Democratic Party. Like, people were infuriated by it. Some people were excited in the most terrible way on the far right, but a lot of people saw that and reeled back in horror. And we wanted to make sure people knew that he was, as Chuck Todd put it, he was the arsonist who set the fire. So it's not just that we want to talk about his votes and their relationship to people's concrete lives, but I do think that it's really clear that there's a message that resonates across race, whether you're white, black, or brown, across geography in rural areas and suburbs and cities alike, that the help that people need, that they are now going to get, Johnson tried to do everything he could to stop it from happening. He was objecting to stimulus money when Trump was president. He demanded that they read this phone book sized legislative text in order to delay just a few more hours from these checks going through. And our strategy is we look for these things that he does that are so inflammatory for folks that we want to sear in their memory. Johnson is against you. Like, he is showing you who he is. And we want to make sure that people remember that and be able to repeat it often enough that when it comes to election time, we're not introducing new information suddenly in the last few weeks, that we're reminding people of memories that they already have when they looked at this guy and what he's doing and said, him being in office hurts me, because he does. He actually does make life worse for people.
We talked on Thursday's pod about the Republican effort ongoing to rebrand themselves as the working class party, which to them involves embracing a Trumpian cultural populism that tells people immigrants are stealing their jobs, China's stealing their jobs, coastal elites are canceling them, all the science nerds are COVID lockdowns, hurt working people, the media is lying to them, big tech is censoring them. What do you think the best response to sort of that populism is? Because I know you just mentioned part of the message about Ron Johnson is he's not on your side. Their message, of course, is going to be, for a number of reasons, Democrats aren't on your side. They're fighting for all these other entities and people who don't look like you.
Yeah, the Republican playbook that they go back to every time, and they do it every time in Wisconsin, is to try to divide people by race so that they can pick the pockets of people of every race. And Johnson, he's pretty intentional with his kind of racist gaslighting. He goes out and he says, I wasn't afraid of the protesters in the insurrection, but if they'd been Black Lives Matter protesters, I would have been afraid. And he says, that wasn't racist. Why would you call me racist? People are calling everything racist. And his goal is to polarize people by race and make white people think that he's, on their side and that other people aren't. And I think being explicit that that's his strategy, and that Republicans try to divide people by race in order to, as Heather McGhee said on the pod, let's drain the swimming pool economics to pull money out of the public sphere, out of the goods that people need, as a way to benefit people at the very top. They wield racism to do that. And So we have to be race explicit, like speak to the fact that they're doing this, because if Democrats and progressives just try to run away from talking about race, it gives the right total control of that conversation. But you can't stop at pointing out that they're being racist. You have to explain why they're doing it, which is always that they're attacking white working class people as well as black and brown working class people, and trying to take benefits and move them to people at the very top. People like Ron Johnson, for example, who benefits enormously from this due to the company that his family bequeathed to him. So this is like, the essential thing is that people get why Johnson's doing it and get how it hits them. And if you do that, he doesn't have a path to win re-election.
Republican legislatures all over the country are responding to losing the last election by redoubling their efforts to try to steal the next one. What kind of trouble is the Wisconsin legislature been up to? And what do Democrats have to do to avoid danger in 2022? What other races are you looking at even between now and then?
The first thing I'll say is Wisconsin has an election on Tuesday. So if you're listening to this on Monday and you are in Wisconsin, then you need to vote. You need to vote tomorrow.
Important. Go vote.
Go vote. I am wearing a vote t-shirt right now. I actually turned in my absentee ballot today, which was a very satisfying experience right after getting my vaccine jab.
Congrats.
If you're not in Wisconsin, you can go to wisdems.org/volunteer and you can get on our virtual phone banks to mobilize voters. This is an election for the head of public schools in Wisconsin, for a superintendent of public instruction. And Jill Underly is our candidate. It's a nonpartisan race. She is the one candidate in the race who consistently, strongly champions public education. There's another candidate who was endorsed by Scott Walker in the primary, and Betsy DeVos's super PAC has been running ads to support, who is mouthing, national right-wing talking points about education stuff. And that's the person we don't want to win. So I'm going to just say Jill Underly's name a couple times, because Jill Underly's the one you want to vote for. That race it's both a kind of a lab test for Republican messaging about whether they can weaponize a bunch of school related issues to go after Democrats, on the culture war front, on the COVID front, all this stuff. But it's also this opportunity to organize and reconnect with this huge number of voters we had last year. There are two special state legislative elections. Melissa Winker's running for state senate, and Carl Yeager is running for state assembly. And we're supporting both of them. There are judicial elections, city council elections, all these local races. I think Democrats everywhere should work on every race in every place. Like, that's how we build the muscle of democracy, and also show people who have the courage to put their name on the ballot that they will have backup when they do that. That lays the groundwork. It's our last statewide election until 22. And then we have this one race alongside Ron Johnson, this one race in Wisconsin that is actually a hinge point for American democracy, which is the race for governor in Wisconsin. We have Tony Evers, who's a terrific governor, who's one of the top vaccinators, governors in the nation right now. But he's our last line of defense against voter suppression. And Republicans in Wisconsin, they just love what they're seeing out of Republicans in Georgia. Wisconsin Republicans have 10 different voter suppression bills that they've already proposed in our state legislature. If Wisconsin Republicans can grab the governorship, if they can beat Tony Evers, then they will pass voter suppression bills in Wisconsin in 2023 to tip the tipping point state in the Electoral College in 2024. And that's why the Republican Governors Association is targeting Tony Evers. It's why the combined might of the right-wing machine will come at us in our state, in Wisconsin. And it's why, whether or not you live in Wisconsin, re-electing Tony Evers has to be a massive priority, because his ability to veto Republican voter suppression bills is the thing that stands between a 2020 where we win the presidency, and 2016 where Wisconsin goes the other way and it gets really dark.
Ben Wikler, as nervous as I was all through the 2020 campaign, knowing that you were the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party made me sleep a little easier. Not much, a little easier, because I was up all night anyway. But every time I thought about Wisconsin, I was like, all right, Wikler's there, so we got it covered. Thank you for all the work that you did, and thank you for all the work that you keep doing. And thanks for joining us on PSA.
Thank you. I love the chance to join, and I will say I'm running for chair again. My chair reelection is in June, and I hope folks will, if you're in Wisconsin, join the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, get involved. It's all hands on deck every year, because democracy is what we make of it. It's not a spectator sport. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you. Have a good one. Take care, man.